Op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is about a really troubling issue right now, which is climate change. We're seeing this on vivid display, and frankly, I suspect that there will be a lot of news reports about this tomorrow. And that is what happened in Acapulco. Acapulco is, a Mexican resort city, and there was a tropical storm heading their way with winds of 50 miles an hour, and they thought everything was going to be good. Acapulco has not been hit by a hurricane above Category 2 ever in recorded history. And this storm, which last night when people went to bed, they were expecting 50, 60 mile an hour winds, and they went to sleep. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, a Category 5 hurricane with 165 mile an hour winds hit Acapulco. And we have no reports out of that city. Apparently, nobody has been able to get, the output of a camera to a satellite phone, for example. They have no power. They have no internet. They presumably have no water, no services of any kind. And they just got hit with a Category 5 hurricane. This is completely unprecedented. We are starting to see these massive tipping points, these massive changes. I reproduced in my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com a graphic from a new study that has just been published that is absolutely shocking, showing that the Antarctic sea ice is off the scale. By off the scale, I mean we're seeing changes for this year, 2023, that are not reflected by any year in previous history. They are so radical. Global sea ice is down. North Atlantic Ocean surface temperatures up. World ocean surface temperatures up. World surface land temperatures up. The cumulative area burned of forests exploding. Now, nobody's sure exactly why. Just in the last 12 months, we've seen this explosion, this rapid transition into a new climate state. But the best guess, it's fairly obvious, the best guess is that we have passed some kind of a climate tipping point. Something has happened within our climate system that has shifted it from its old relatively stable state to its new, hopefully relatively stable state. But it's looking like this actually may be not a new state. This may be a transition point into a new state as long as we continue burning fossil fuels, which we will almost certainly continue to do for at least another decade. But they're trying to figure out, what made this huge change this year. One theory is that it has to do with the Atlantic Ocean changing temperature, which changes the ability of the winds above the ocean to hold dirt from North Africa. Dirt that could either hold in heat or could reflect heat back into outer space. So there's one theory that it has to do with dust concentrations in the atmosphere. Another theory is that the January 2022 eruption of the volcano at Hunga this was a year and a half ago, injected 146 million tons of water vapor and 420,000 tons of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. And that those are greenhouse gases, and they keep heat trapped more efficiently. And so there's another theory that this might be what we might be looking at might just be a 1 or 2 year anomaly based on a volcanic explosion. Some scientists argue that it was caused by a change in worldwide regulations mandating that ships burn diesel fuel that doesn't have high levels of particulate emission. There's so many ships on the oceans, moving so much cargo all around the world that all of the pollution from those ships was actually blocking out some of the sunlight and keeping some of the heat from hitting the earth. And now it's been 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I'm not sure how long, but it's been, in the last decade, that worldwide, the world has gotten together and said, no, we're going to, you're going to require you to burn diesel fuel that is not the old cheap, kind of poisonous diesel fuel, but the newer, cleaner diesel fuel. And the result of that is that these fine particles that reflect the sun back out are no longer being put into the atmosphere. And so the atmosphere is transmitting heat more efficiently from, the stratosphere or from outer space, from the sun, down to the surface of the Earth. And that increase in efficiency is responsible for this dramatic increase that we've seen in the last 12 months, more or less. And of course, there's the El Nino. We've gone from a La Nina year a couple of years ago to an El Nino this year, and that the El Nino typically brings more heat out of the ocean and up to the surface where it can then transfer into the atmosphere. Nobody's really sure exactly which of these might be what is causing this problem, or if it's something else altogether. But it is such a huge anomaly that this article that was published in the peer-reviewed journal, science journal Bioscience, opens with this quote. This is how these scientists open their article in a peer-reviewed science publication, Bioscience. Quote, "Life on planet Earth is under siege. We are now in an uncharted territory. For several decades, scientists have consistently warned of a future marked by extreme climatic conditions because of escalating global temperatures caused by ongoing human activities that release harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Unfortunately," they write, "time is up. We are seeing the manifestation of those predictions as an alarming and unprecedented succession of climate records are broken, causing profoundly distressing scenes of suffering to unfold. We are entering an unfamiliar domain regarding our climate crisis, a situation no one has ever witnessed firsthand in the history of humankind." End quote. They look at 35 different vital signs, they call them, that signal the health of our planet, and they found that 20 out of these 35, markers of planetary health are off the scale in the wrong place. They've just broken the mold. While wind and solar power grew 17% between 2021 and 2022, both are now cheaper than unsubsidized fossil fuels. Nonetheless, we are burning fossil fuels, or we're producing electricity with fossil fuels at a 15-to-1 ratio versus the electricity that we are producing with renewable sources. Life on Earth is not going to be safe until we reverse those numbers. Now, we're moving in the right direction, but, we've got a ways to go because, and you can track an awful lot of this back to the Reagan and Thatcher administrations in the 70s and 80s. It was in the 1970s that scientists first started really seriously ringing the alarm bells about climate change, about global warming. It was in the 70s and 80s that the scientists at the big fossil fuel companies, at Shell and at ExxonMobil and some of these other companies, came to a clear understanding that their products were warming the Earth and that this would have dire consequences for future generations, and then chose to cover it up and spend money to deny the science that they themselves had learned. If we had been making the transitions to renewable energy that we're making right now, if our automakers had been making electric cars like we are making right now, if we had been doing that back in the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan was denying climate change, and Republicans continue to this day to deny climate change, if we had made these changes 40 years ago, we would have led the world. And the entire world would be in a very different place right now. And we wouldn't be looking at Acapulco being wiped out. And we wouldn't be looking at massive levels of forest fires and wildfires and floods and derecos and all the other things that climate change has brought us. But because a handful of fossil fuel executives and wealthy people in the Republican Party and American right-wing billionaires decided that the money that they were making from fossil fuels was more important than the planet on which we all live, we're here. All over the planet, glaciers are in retreat. Sea ice shelves and glaciers covering Greenland and Antarctica are melting. Coral reefs are bleaching and dying. Fish and marine mammal species are undergoing radical changes in their habitat. The ambulatory animals are, coral can't move. It's an animal, but it can't move. But fish can move, and they are. They're moving toward the poles. They're moving away from the equatorial regions because the water's just gotten too hot for them. We've got, and all this wild weather, severe damaging hail, tornadoes in areas that have never seen them before. We had a tornado over downtown Portland last week. We don't get tornadoes first of all, you typically don't get tornadoes in cities, but secondly, we've never had a tornado in Portland, at least not to the best of my knowledge. The weather people were shocked. There was a tornado, but now it didn't touch down, so it wasn't like, big news because it didn't do a lot of damage, but it was a tornado. You're not supposed to have those things here. Bomb cyclones. When did you first learn of bomb cyclones? I first learned of the phrase bomb cyclones when Louise and I were living in D.C. Because D.C. was getting these bomb cyclones where in the winter, where literally Arctic air masses would drool down over North America and sock us. We lived on a boat in D.C. at the Capitol Yacht Club, and our boat was frozen in. We had, us and all the other boats around us, they were putting these things called ice cutters in the water. They're just like fans, little electric propellers that continuously move the water so that the ice wouldn't freeze and damage the hulls of the boats. This is not supposed to happen. I mean, occasionally you get bad winters in D.C., but this was like, from normal to 30 below, just that fast, or however cold it was. It was very, very cold. And I can tell you, 46-foot 1986 Chris Craft Constellation boats are not well insulated. We were living in a fiberglass boat with no insulation. We had a $700 electric bill that month. It was amazing, just running the heaters in the little boat. This is not how it's supposed to be. We need to wake the hell up and do something about this.